The kingdom of Vashmir thrived under the rule of King Harsh, a ruler admired for his generosity. Every morning, as the golden sun bathed the land in its warmth, the king rode through the bustling streets in his grand chariot, distributing food to the hungry. Stray dogs trailed behind, wagging their tails, and beggars bowed in gratitude. His people revered him, calling him their savior. Yet, beneath the admiration, a question lingered. Was his kindness truly selfless, or did it feed his pride? Unbeknownst to him, fate was preparing a lesson that would challenge everything he believed in. One day, as the king handed a loaf of bread to a frail beggar, a cunning minister beside him whispered, "Your Majesty, without you, these poor souls would wither away. You are their lifeline." The king's lips curled into a pleased smile, his chest swelling with pride. But just then, a deep, unexpected laugh broke the moment. Turning, he saw an aged saint sitting cross-legged under a banyan tree, his eyes gleaming with wisdom. The king furrowed his brows, confused by the saint's amusement. "Oh, wise one, what do you find so amusing?" he asked. The saint's smile never wavered as he replied, "Minister's words entertain me, O king. He credits you with a power you do not possess. You see, it is not you who feed these people and creatures, but the Almighty. We are mere instruments in the grand design. True generosity comes from love, not from the desire to be worshipped." The king's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Was this holy man daring to belittle his kindness? His heart burned with the need to prove the saint wrong, to prove that he alone controlled the fate of the needy. That night, the king lay awake, the saint's words gnawing at his mind like a persistent echo. He clenched his fists, his pride refusing to yield. If he truly held no power, then what would happen if he stopped his charity? Would the hungry not starve? Would the dogs not whimper in despair? The thought planted a dangerous seed, and by morning his resolve was firm. That day, as his chariot rolled through the kingdom, the baskets remained untouched. The poor reached out with trembling hands, the dogs whimpered at his feet, but the king's gaze remained cold. Days passed, and the change in the kingdom was unmistakable. Once lively streets now bore the weight of silence. The beggars grew gaunt, their eyes hollow with hunger. The stray dogs, once playful and full of life, staggered weakly, their ribs protruding beneath matted fur. The bustling energy that had once defined his kingdom began to fade. Yet, deep within his heart, the king waited for something, for the moment when desperation would prove him right. He longed to see the saint's faith crumble, for him to admit that kindness was not divine, but a mere gift of a ruler's hand. On the 7th day, as the king rode through the streets, he found the same saint seated in his usual spot, calm and composed. The king pulled his chariot to a stop, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "Look at them," he declared, gesturing towards the skeletal dogs and starving beggars. "You spoke of divine generosity, yet without my aid they suffer. Does this not prove that it was I who sustained them?" His voice dripped with certainty, expecting the saint to finally concede. But the holy man merely smiled, unfazed by the scene before him. "Tell me, Your Majesty," the saint said, his voice steady, "have you watched them closely? Have you seen how they survive?" The king scoffed, shaking his head. "Survive? They are barely clinging to life. A few more days without food, and they will surely perish." The saint nodded slowly, as if contemplating his words. "Life and death are not in your hands," he said. "If suffering is their fate, then so be it. But know this, true kindness is not a performance nor a tool for self-importance. It is given without expectation, without pride, and without the need for recognition." The king's fingers curled around the reins of his chariot, frustration mounting. The saint's unshaken belief infuriated him. He had expected the holy man to waver, to realize the futility of his faith. Instead, the saint remained unwavering, his words more piercing than ever. The king's pride was wounded, but he was not ready to surrender. He would prove, once and for all, that power, not unseen forces, controlled the fate of the weak. The next day, as he prepared for his usual rounds, his chariot gleamed under the morning sun, its baskets once again brimming with food. Yet, fate had different plans. As the chariot rumbled through the streets, an unexpected jolt sent the king tumbling forward. A sharp crack echoed through the air. The wheel had shattered. In an instant, the mighty king found himself sprawled on the dusty ground, pain shooting through his body. his food baskets overturned, scattering their contents across the dirt. Dazed and breathless, he looked around, his eyes widening as a pack of the same starving dogs rushed toward him. A flicker of fear gripped him. Had hunger driven them mad? Would they tear him apart in their desperation? The king braced himself, expecting sharp fangs to sink into his flesh. But what happened next sent a shiver down his spine. The dogs did not lunge at the food nor at him. Instead, they circled him protectively, their tired eyes filled with something unexplainable: concern. One licked his trembling hand, another nudged his shoulder, whimpering softly. They were not here to harm him. They were here to guard him. A lump formed in the king's throat as he watched the creatures he had abandoned show him kindness, even when he had denied them the same. A familiar voice broke the silence. "O king," the saint said, stepping forward, his eyes warm with understanding. "Do you see now? Love is not something to be commanded. These creatures do not care for you because you fed them. They care for you because they feel your presence in their hearts. Today, your pride and power could not protect you, yet the selfless love you once gave, even unknowingly, has returned to shield you." The king felt a hot tear slip down his cheek. The weight of his arrogance crushed him, and in that moment he understood the depth of his mistake. As I lay on the cold, dusty ground, surrounded by creatures I had once ignored, a deep shame clawed at my soul. These dogs, frail and starving, had chosen to comfort me rather than take the food scattered before them. My pride, which once towered over reason, now crumbled beneath the weight of realization. What had I proven? That power meant nothing when kindness was absent? That my rule, though prosperous, lacked true compassion? The saint's words echoed in my mind. Kindness should not be a performance. For the first time, I questioned my intentions, my purpose, my very rule. I struggled to sit up, my body aching from the fall. The dogs didn't move away but remained close, their warmth an unspoken reassurance. My hands trembled as I reached out, gently stroking the nearest one. It whined, leaning into my touch, as if it had forgiven my cruelty without hesitation. A lump formed in my throat. I had denied them food, hoping to prove a point, yet here they were, showing me a love I did not deserve. A wave of regret surged through me. My arrogance had blinded me to the simplest truth: love is given, not earned. The saint knelt beside me, his eyes calm yet knowing. "What do you feel, O king?" he asked, his voice soft. My throat tightened as I struggled for words. "I see now," I whispered. "I was wrong. I gave not out of kindness, but out of pride. I sought admiration, not the joy of giving." The saint nodded approvingly. True kindness does not seek validation. It does not expect gratitude or worship. It flows like a river, expecting nothing in return, yet nourishing everything in its path. His words settled into my heart like seeds ready to bloom. I turned my gaze to the food scattered on the ground, untouched. My subjects, the beggars and the weak, watched from a distance, hesitant to approach. How many had suffered because of my stubborn pride? How many nights had they slept with empty stomachs because I sought to prove my own importance? I inhaled deeply, the weight of my actions pressing heavily upon me. Then, with a newfound determination, I reached for a piece of bread and extended it towards the dogs. They hesitated at first, their instincts wary, but soon they accepted it, not with greed, but with gratitude. The moment felt like a rebirth. As I fed the creatures I had once ignored, I felt lighter, as though shedding the chains of arrogance that had bound me for so long. Slowly, the beggars approached, their eyes filled with cautious hope. I beckoned them forward, distributing the food with no desire for praise, only an ache to undo the damage I had caused. A hush fell over the street as my people watched, witnessing a transformation not in their king, but in the man beneath the crown. In that moment, I was not a ruler, I was simply human. A murmur spread through the crowd as the saint rose to his feet. "Today, O king, you have truly given," he declared. "Not from a throne of power, but from a heart that understands. Kindness is not a gift of the mighty, it is the breath of the soul." His words resonated through me deeper than any praise I had ever received. My wealth, my title, my rule, none of it held meaning if my heart was not in the right place. I finally understood. Giving was not about proving power, but about honoring the bond that connected all living beings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood, my body still aching, but my spirit lighter than ever before. My people bowed, not out of duty, but out of a shared understanding. The beggars, the weak, the starving, they were not beneath me. They were a part of me. And from that day forward, I vowed to serve them not as their king, but as a fellow soul walking the same journey of life. My wealth would no longer be a tool for my pride, but a bridge to uplift those who needed it most. My reign would change forever? Days turned into weeks, and my kingdom flourished, not just in prosperity, but in spirit. The markets bustled once more, not only with trade, but with acts of kindness exchanged between neighbors. Stray animals were no longer abandoned, but cared for by those who had once ignored them. Love spread like an unspoken language, binding my people together in a way no gold or power ever could. The saint had long since departed, yet his words lingered in my heart, a constant reminder of the lesson I had learned. I had not lost my pride, I had found my purpose. One evening, as I stood on my palace balcony, watching the city bathed in the warm glow of lanterns, I saw a familiar sight. The same stray dogs sat at the gates, their tails wagging, their eyes filled not with hunger, but with recognition. They had not forgotten me. I descended the stairs, kneeling before them as they nuzzled against me. I laughed, a sound that felt freer than it had in years. They had been my greatest teachers, showing me a love untainted by expectations. A love that had humbled me, healed me, and changed the course of my life. And so my kingdom thrived, not because of my wealth, but because of a single truth. I had learned to give, not with my hands, but with my heart. The people no longer called me their savior, nor did I wish for them to. Instead, they called me something far greater. A king who ruled not with pride, but with love. And in the end, I knew beyond all doubt that was the only title worth having.